And now we're going to hear from the ADHD coaches. We've got together some ADHD workplace coaches, ADDCA certified, to discuss how ADHD coaching helps people in the workplace and small business owners and entrepreneurs. So thank you, Kat. I'm now going to find the panelists here. So I'm just going to, here we go. So we've got Richard and Tina, Alex, Eleni. Okay, so guys, I'll ask you to start your videos. This is great. So we've got Eleni, Alex, Richard, and Tina, all ADDCA certified and all ADHD advocate coaches. Actually, we've got a panel of ADHD advocate coaches here, which is great. This is good. So basically how we're going to do this, I'm just going to ask a few questions so that participants can get a better idea of the kind of challenges we help ADHDs in the workplace with. So I'll kind of go through each, ask everyone, but let's start with you, Alex. So Alex, what kind of challenges do most kind of workplace people, do you see in the workplace that are brought to coaching?
Quite a lot of different ones. So some people, I think, are in the wrong careers. So that's one of the challenges. They basically, when they look at their careers or their current company through an ADHD lens, particularly if they've got a recent diagnosis, they realize that it's a bad fit for them. A lot of people, I think, another one is like often people are working to like neurotypical rhythms. A lot of offices are set up for the neurotypical norm, and sometimes, you know, the times where people with ADHD have energy, or where they have, are the times where people have the kind of meetings about the Christmas lunch and things like that. So a lot of it is around often setting boundaries around needs. A lot of people have kind of quite a lot of needs around different kind of stimulation. So like, you know, managing transitions or managing working hours. Sometimes it's also advocacy as well. You know, I think a lot of people with ADHD need a lot of extrinsic energy around what they're doing. Often they need bosses. You know, bosses can be that vital allies in helping to clarify parameters of scope. But a lot of people with ADHD end up getting micromanaged, which is often quite bad and shuts them down. So sometimes it's also kind of advocating very specifically for what they need.
Thanks. Yeah, they're from the sounds of, there's a lot of challenges, right? Like you gave a really good picture of just a few of them. Tina, did you want to also add in terms of your coaching? What do you see ADHDs bring?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, building on what Alex said about being in the wrong career. So I don't think there is a, well, and Alex would agree with this, I know, there's not a right or wrong career per se, right? It's much more about if a person's strength is actually playing to the job that they're doing. And sometimes that can really change as they grow in a company as well, or if they move around. Like they could be really good at their job, and then because they're good at their job, they get a promotion, but actually this new job doesn't actually align with their strengths. Like, but obviously we want to move that way. And often what I identify with clients as well is that if they can actually go from the thing that they're good at to not the next one, but the next one up potentially, or a different kind of sideways role, that would play to their strengths more. So I think in coaching, when you're talking about people in the workplace, there's a lot of work of just understanding where your strengths actually lie and how they show up at work, and how you can then kind of use them more to do a good job, feel good, but also to explain to other people like what you'd be good doing, like how they should use you, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, very, very much. Richard, did you want to layer on top of that, or also any challenges that maybe haven't been mentioned here that are brought to you?
Yeah, I think, well, again, one thing Alex mentioned was managers are pretty crucial. And you know, if your manager can understand your ADHD and your ADHD needs, they can be fantastic allies, and they can do a lot of the advocacy for you in the workplace. I think the real struggle comes with managers that perhaps don't potentially understand neurodiversity, or in particular ADHD. And I think that's a great opportunity for us as coaches to do, I think it's called co-coaching, is that what they call it now? Where, you know, we coach the employee and the manager, or the client and the manager. And yeah, I think that brings a fair amount of understanding, and also we can help advocate for the employee at that, at that point in need. And also, after a few sessions of coaching, we also have a fairly good insight into their strengths, and so we can also advocate for those. And perhaps, are there places where they can offload their work to, where their strengths, where they're not strong, and are there places where they're perhaps better utilized, as Alex was saying. So managers play a massive role in how well or how productive, and I like to use this, how safe an employee feels in their workplace. So yeah.
You did a really good, we did LinkedIn Lives daily as part of ADHD Awareness Month, and Richard did a great webinar on safety, the importance of safety. So yeah, for more about that, go to our YouTube channel and look Richard's talk up on safety, because that extends not just obviously in the workplace. ADHD is in every context. It's crucial. So yeah, that's very
Can I add
very good
something
point.
to that,
Yeah.
Steph? Because it's so true, the thing about managers, and there's a really good report called that Neurodiversity in Business report did, and trying to think of the name of it was done in the conjunction with Birkbeck University, and Nancy Doyle's involved in this as well. And that the two things that I took from that was managers plays a massive part in how well a neurodiverse person does in the workplace, and tailored adjustments. So not just adjustments, they have to be tailored, which kind of comes back to, how does that particular individual work? That was what made the most difference in the workplace, according to that. So
thank you for sharing. That's so true. And again, you can draw parallels to other contexts like education, teachers, the role of teachers and students with ADHD and how motivated they are, because in the subjects where they like the teacher, they tend to perform really, really well. But where they don't like the teacher, it's interesting how you can, it's a similar thing with ADHDs. Eleni, did you want to add to any of the challenges that you
Yes,
see?
absolutely. Not just on in the workplace, but even something I see my clients bringing to coaching is having trouble with this negativity bias that I think David spoke about yesterday. And many of the clients I work with, and I think ADHDs in general, get used to hearing, and as we know, that negativity can stay with us a lot longer than the positivity that we need, and often the direction that we seek as well. So that sort of carries into, as Tina was saying, types of job we have, the growth that we crave, maybe the recognition that we need, all symptoms kind of around this, coming from this place of sort of being behind the 8 ball and kind of recognizing what we need to ask for or seek out to be successful in the workplace.
Yeah, it's really stacked against us, isn't it, in terms of advocating for ourselves with the traits of negativity, rejection, sensitivity. It's very, very hard for ADHDers to advocate for themselves, and quite often they find themselves passed over in promotion, everyone else getting promoted, and then they wonder why, how come, I'm working harder than that person, I've contributed more, I've been here longer, I, break my back, and why is it that I'm not getting promoted? Did anyone want to comment on this? Have you seen this as well with your clients, guys?
One thing that I would add to that is that there's a saying in business coaching, and I originally trained as a business coach, which is that people get promoted to their level of incompetence. I think with ADHD, it's much more different than that. I think often people's level of incompetence with ADHD is often the more administrative, more kind of mundane sides of their role. And often their level of competence is actually the kind of premium bits of their role, like the ability to remove silos, to energize people, to lead, to kind of resolve kind of complex problems. And I think that's the thing a lot of the time where people with ADHD are held back in careers, is because basically they're bogged down by the things that they're not good at, which are often the less premium aspects of their role. And actually, sometimes they'd be much more effective in more senior positions where there is more scaffolding around that, and they have got potentially a PA or a project manager or an office manager as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's what Tina was mentioning as well, how they sometimes better off if they skip that level. And a lot of managing directors, I don't know if you found this as well, but the managing director clients of ours, they've gotten up there, not the usual route. They've kind of skipped some of the steps, and kind of got up there somehow strategically. They've been very kind of strategic about, getting up there. So they haven't had to go through those painful points and rungs of the ladder. Yeah. Okay, so what about entrepreneurs, guys? What kind of challenges do you see with your small business owners? What are their challenges? Richard?
I could go. Yeah, I think trusting in their competence. Actually, I think you've got a favorite saying, Stephanie, which is just throw your backpack over the wall and see what happens. And I think, what's interesting is I was speaking to someone this morning, actually, and we got onto the subject of intuition. And he says, I know my intuition is really good, but I question it all the time. And I distrust it. And, that's 3 years of, again, we go back to negative messaging and kind of not having that validation or reinforcement in the right ways. And so you do end up almost not trusting your gut. And the gut is a pretty powerful thing. And it's, again, sorry to go back to it, but it's linked to safety. And, and knowing your stuff. And so when your gut says, yeah, I'm in the right place with this, and then you talk yourself out of it, it's a real shame. And that's what I find a lot of the entrepreneurs do. So they kind of know what they're good at, but it's getting themselves to have a go at it, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
That makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing that I support entrepreneurs with is sorting out all of the ideas. Like, what shall I do with them? Which one shall I run with? Which one's important now? And because, yeah, there's a lot of swirling ideas, I think, for a lot of us. But when you're an entrepreneur, then you kind of really have to, you often only got yourself. So it can be really good to then work with a coach to kind of really put that in order and just feel good about it as well. Like, you can put it in order, but still not be sure, like Richard says, trust your gut, that is actually the right thing to do. It's just having somebody else to kind of really iron that out with. And I sometimes get the question as well, should I get a sort of business coach or should I get an ADHD coach? And I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. But if you have any kind of neurodiversity, always get a coach that has a good understanding of neurodiversity. Either way would be my advice on that.
No, that's a really good point around the ideas. That's definitely the issue, isn't it? Because they're an entrepreneur for a reason. And it's often, and I was speaking to someone just earlier today, actually, and yeah, what they wanted help with was, I'm doing 5 kind of different businesses. I need to start, narrowing the focus. Which one should I do? Because ADHD has struggled to choose, and they've got that fear of missing out as well. It's, yeah, it can be very frustrating for them. Does anyone else want to add anything onto the experience of coaching entrepreneurs?
2 things I can add there. So one thing I use quite a lot in business coaching, I think it's very useful, particularly when coaching entrepreneurs or people going through career changes, is I use something called big, hairy, audacious goals. And it's looking at the sweet spot between 3 things: what people are passionate about, what they're good at, what they've got evidence that they're good at, and what's sustainable. And I think there's 2 aspects to it. One is from an ADHD perspective, setting up a scaffolding that makes the business sustainable. I think what that theory says is you've just got the other 2, the what you're good at and what you're passionate about. You're blissful but broke. So I think there's a sustainability aspect, and then the other aspect I think that's really critical is keeping things playful. I think there's a lot written about basically people doing jobs that they love with ADHD, but anyone that's coached by me, I use the term Goldilocks quite a lot, and it's like working out what's too little, what's too much, and then working out the little ground, and again working out the middle ground. And I think if people, I think that's one of those half truths with ADHD. If you've got something you're passionate about, but it becomes a chore, or that you're literally relying on that to put food on the table, it's amazing how quickly the passion diminishes. So again, I think what I always look at with entrepreneurs is the sustainability. And again, if you can't do everything, what was the one thing that you can take forward?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I remember, there's that saying, make your passion your profession. But, like you said, quite often, if it becomes the profession, you could lose the passion. But then also on the other side, quite often we see our ADHDs burn out, right? Because the passion, the fire just burns too much, that hyper focus kicks in. And, what they need help with is kind of boundaries and trying to get themselves out of their own way and being able to find balance. Do you guys find that as well, that there are quite a few ADHDs, the workaholic types, that actually the problem's not productivity, but they're not living, they're not prioritizing any joy, and because they're just they're shooting all over themselves, and their anxiety of kind of not meeting that deadline, they've taken on too much, and so they're just workhorses.
I think it's very often a cycle. I had a client the other day who called it just boom or bust. Like she's just going from one to the other constantly. And that was literally what she wanted from coaching, was just to try and get a bit more balance within that roller coaster. And that all comes down to just understanding what it is that drives that, etc. I don't have much else to say, so I'll let you go, Richard.
Thanks. Funny enough, I find the burnout is way more prevalent in the employee sphere. And I think a lot of that comes down to masking in the workplace. I know that lots of us work from home now. So perhaps that's diminished somewhat, but still, you're still going on Zoom calls or team calls or whatever it is. And so that masking is kind of 24/7. So I find that, certainly the burnout is a lot more prevalent in that situation than the entrepreneurs. Yeah, just an insight.
Just to go along with what Richard said, excuse me, Alex, it's also that paradox that David touched on yesterday, is that the fear of failure or success for many ADHDers. I think a lot of what I'm hearing is we have clients that feel like they'll miss something, or there's just so much to do. It's that sense of overwhelm that keeps building and building, and helping them get some clarity around why they keep going and sort of their goals and their concrete objectives is something that they very much often need some support around.
I'd agree with Richard with the burnout thing. I think one of the things that I see a lot with people with ADHD, and I think before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I was guilty of myself, is that they sacrifice on themselves on the altar of corporate dysfunction. So if a company is dysfunctional, it's divested a lot of staff, or the culture is dysfunctional. I think what neurotypical people tend to do better is that they modify their quality standards or their quantitative standards accordingly. What people with ADHD tend to do is try and operate to the same standards, and as a result, they burn themselves out. And one of the things I say a lot to my clients is we're all disappointingly dispensable. Companies will get rid of you when you no longer serve a purpose, and that's actually a positive, not a negative. There's no value in burning yourself out, basically, for a dysfunctional company.
Such an important point, isn't it? I mean, yeah, so often it's the case that the ADHD is that, the canary in the mine types, and some of them are so systems oriented. So they might come in at a more junior position, but they can kind of see, hang on, that's completely inefficient. It should be done this way. The manager might not be as detailed, as they are, maybe not even as efficient. And that's where there can be a lot of frustration, because if an ADHD is, going to do something with that very high standard, but they'll just be set up, they're just going to fail, or someone else or something else is going to get in the way. And so quite a lot of the time, I don't know about you, but I definitely see some of the ADHDs, they just have to start disengaging and not caring, because, as you said, that kind of frustration, that corporate dysfunction. But that's quite often when they have to leave the workplace, because that misalignment of values and standards, they just can't function. They can't function in that environment.
And the justice piece.
Sorry.
You go, Alex.
Yeah, so it's also the company. I mean, I used to manage quite big teams, and I think, and I think I prided myself, and I think I had a good reputation as a manager that developed staff. But if you've got one member of staff who basically, and I think this is a classic ADHD thing, who tells you that they're not coping but continues to cope, there isn't a business problem for the manager to solve. You've got another member of staff who puts up boundaries, says they're only going to work their hours or wants something resolved, and basically sets boundaries and needs in that regard, then you have got a business problem to solve. And I think the tragedy with ADHD is that what happens is that the business solves the problem when the person with ADHD has gone off sick or burnt out or quit the job altogether.
Yeah. So I was just going to mention that kind of sense of justice that ADHDers have. And, I think, yeah, as you said, if you're working double the amount of everybody else, the injustice in that is also pretty harrowing. So,
yeah, that is a really good point. And this goes back, David could work, ADDCA, they teach us to find out the signature strengths of ADHDers. And, quite often there's fairness, appreciation of beauty and excellence, love of learning, honesty, leadership. So all these strengths that, are quite common to ADHDers in terms of the highest strengths. And then unfortunately, some of the lower strengths are quite common too. But yeah, it is really important that values align, I found. So in terms of the coaching, what kind of strategies in your experience, guys, what are the types of things that you find help? Let's start with the employees in the workplace. What kind of things help that they come up with in coaching? Tina?
Well, so I was actually going to add something to what we're saying there as well in terms, but it sort of ties in, I suppose. It is, I think it is a lot around understanding what you bring to the workplace and what strengths you're actually bringing. Because a lot of the time, I think as ADHDers, we're the things that we're good at, we just dismiss. Like that's just what we do. That's not a talent or that's not a strength. That's just what I do. So I think a lot of the coaching is actually pointing out, no, you're actually contributing something here. And what I've seen, what I also come across a bit, because I've got a bit of a HR background, is where people get into conflict. It's they've been hired to do a job because of their ADHD, essentially. Like they got really high sense of creativity and they're great in the brainstorm and they don't hold back, but then they get pulled up for being the same way, but maybe in a social situation where they're like, you have to think about what you say before you speak. And it's like, okay, but you can't kind of love it in one situation and then penalize it in another situation. Well, you can, but if you're an enlightened employer, you should really see that there's something you're benefiting from and maybe need to make some accommodations around. Yeah.
Alex, did you want to talk about some of the things that you find work, people that come up with in coaching?
I think a lot of it is I think advocacy and one of the things, I think one of the things I've done quite a lot of workplace advocacy work, and one of the things I often ask, employers or forums of whether it might be coaches or managers, is how can you best support someone with ADHD? And they tend to come up with like a myriad set of answers, often around things like, managing noise or accountability or body dubbing, often good answers. But the one thing that I say always is the best thing you can do to help someone with ADHD is ask them what they need. And I think, because you meet 1,000 people with ADHD, you meet 1,000 different people, and there's core traits, but it's not a one size fits all approach. And I think quite a lot of enlightened employers, that's the problem that they do have. If they have like a neurodiversity policy, it's very much a one size fits all. And it's what works for one person doesn't work for another. So I think one of the things I do quite a lot with clients is what I call like remembering what they know, like noticing what's present when things are going well and what's absent when things are going badly, and then what's needed to recreate those environments. Because often in one environment, someone can be hyper functional and their executive functions can show up. In another environment or with another manager, those same functions are marked by their absence. So there's a huge situational variability, and I think the more you can help employees understand that for themselves, and then employers to understand that through advocacy, the more you can set some up to succeed.
Yeah, so that importance of them, understanding their ADHD, obviously, and their needs, is crucial from what you're saying. And then obviously in terms of the advocacy, the organization, the managers, the peers, being able to look through that ADHD lens as well. Because what we've found, when we're coaching ADHD, is we can help them better understand their ADHD, really identify their needs. We can even help them communicate for those needs to be met. But if it falls on deaf ears, right, that frustration grows. Like the ADHD knows better, but they can't do better, and they're being blocked. Even when they've done the work, it can really cause even more frustration and disengagement. Have you found that as well?
Just to add something to what Alex said about executive function, and many clients that I've coached that are often tasked with a project with maybe a finite goal or outcome in mind, but having the structure around getting there is often something clients can struggle with. So concrete goals along the way, seeking the right kind of support, being able to do all the executive function things that neurotypicals, for lack of a better word, can take for granted, sequencing, pulling on other resources, recalling information that they might need, focusing on tasks that they might need to but aren't authentically interesting. All these things can certainly affect how they head towards the outcome, and of course the finished product in general, which is, I think everybody has said, having the right kind of manager can make all the difference.
Yeah. Anyone else want to talk about any other kind of strategies?
Yeah. Well, I think when we're talking about coaching in the workplace, I think coaching is always about learning about yourself and understand what works and how to leverage that. And I think with ADHD, there are so many books, and there's documentaries, and there's TikTok even, right? Lots of generic information out there. But even if you've read it all and you understand what it's all about, you still need to understand, so now what? Like, what do I do with that? How do I leverage that? And how does it apply to me? Like most people, I think, has an idea that if I'm able to, sequence it, break it down, or use a Pomodoro timer, I've heard that's good for me. But it's still understanding the nuances of how that technique actually would work for you, or maybe it doesn't even work for you, right? And I think that's where coaching is always helpful. And coming back to Richard's point as well, and Stephanie said this as well, like even the most enlightened employer that has a box of tricks for, oh right, you've got ADHD, here we go, here's the accommodations we have for that. And they, even if they do that, it might not be very helpful, as you said, but one thing we can be sure of is that they'll go, what can we do for you? And I think the best thing anyone can do in that situation is actually understand a bit more about themselves and what they might need. And that's where coaching just fits in so beautifully, in order to just know what to ask for.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because what we find with ADHD is they're kind of blind to a lot of the patterns. They come to coaching and they don't really know the sources of the issues. Maybe they're not even aware of some of the issues that maybe other colleagues. And through the coaching process, they really get a clearer picture. They get a clearer picture of, hang on, this is what's going on. And so the coaching then helps them actually be able to ask for the things they actually need and explain it in a way. Yeah, that's exactly
it. And then,
it.
like you said, they learn how to talk to it, right? The vocabulary and explain to other people is another great. And I think always with these things as well, confidence and self-belief is a beautiful byproduct of all of it, really.
So moving to outcomes then, guys. So what kind of outcomes have you been able to achieve for clients? Alex, did you want to start off?
Quite a lot of different ones. I mean, one of the things I do quite a lot of is help people to clarify future career aspirations. So some of the most satisfying coaching engagements have actually been supporting people to actually either move from corporate careers to their own businesses. So I've had people that have gone from being lawyer. One client who went from being a lawyer to being a furniture maker, which was fantastic. I've got another one that went from being previous client who went from being an accountant to being a dancer. So some of those are quite exciting, where people want to actually make big career changes. I think the other thing where you can make a really big difference is help people to kind of advocate for what they need, clarify for what they need, and then potentially, particularly if they've it depends. I mean, I think the other thing I think you can do quite a lot with, when some of my clients have divulged their ADHD status to the workplace, and said that they've got ADHD, or they've come to coaching having been supported by employer to get an ADHD diagnosis. Others haven't, for whatever reason, the stigma, or the employer that they work with. But I think the other thing that you can do is you can very much advocate for ADHD benefits without necessarily saying you have ADHD as well. There's a lot of conversations you can have around like work-life balance, around different like sensory distractions, the way in which you work, the rhythm in which you work. I think a lot about ADHD is about managing energy rather than managing time. So I think the other thing you can do quite a lot with clients is people can advocate for ADHD without necessarily talking directly about ADHD as well. So you can support clients. I mean, I think generally speaking, it's better if you've got a client who feels confident to divulge that they've got ADHD, but there's ways in which you can work as well without that as well.
Thank you, Alex. Eleni, did you want to talk about the kind of outcomes that you achieve?
Yeah, just to, I think, add to what Alex has said, a lot of our clients have become comfortable maybe in jobs that they're not able to leave for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's a feeling of responsibility. For whatever reason, they're stuck. And those that come to coaching to sort of get some help around becoming unstuck, we then start to have those conversations, like Alex said, that maybe reveal sort of much different paths that are possible, but perhaps never explored. So kind of embracing that maybe undercurrent, if you will, about why change is not happening can be really valuable as well.
Eleni. Tina, kind of outcomes that you help clients achieve for themselves, I should say. Yes.
Yeah. It's definitely not a formulaic anything, right? It's like everyone's said, sometimes it's promotions, but sometimes it's just being comfortable where you are and know that you're comfortable, so you just happier, right? I think work-life balance is probably another big one as well in terms of outcomes, and it's an interesting one because we think work-life balance actually shifts what we're doing, but often it's much more about just being content about what's happening, like understanding what's happening and being content in the various spaces whenever we are in those spaces. But that's definitely one I get enough of. Also, just being comfortable managing teams. Like when somebody has been promoted, and there might be a bit of a challenge. I mean, there's so much involved with new job or a new position from a neurodiversity perspective, not the least just transitions and change. And so just getting support in getting comfortable there and just really enjoying kind of managing people, which can often be, depending on your strengths and challenges, but it can be a hurdle. Yeah.
Richard?
Outcomes, yeah. I suppose I wanted to sort of talk more to a client really understanding what the obstacles are within their work environment, and that could be as an employee or as an entrepreneur. And I think those obstacles feed back into essentially our brain and cause a lot of noise. So understanding those obstacles or the environment within, and then trying to modify that environment so that the noise being fed back into the system is less, can really help, particularly with executive functioning. And again, I mean, if we get really down to it, we're back to safety. And so, you know, the safer you feel in an environment, the better you're going to work. And that could be because you're with colleagues and you feel more connected. Equally, it could be you're at home, so you don't feel you have to mask as much. So it really is very dependent on the individual. So a lot of the work that I try and do, or sorry, we try and do, is around understanding what your state is and what those triggers are, but equally, what are the things that move you into, what are the things that get you into a decent state so you can actually function well. So yeah, that's one of the things that we try and work on, particularly for those who have had sort of mild trauma, that kind of thing. So
yeah, it's like what Tina said as well. We meet the client where they are. It could be that as an employee, really, suffering from emotional dysregulation, rejection sensitivity, and the goal maybe is to get them back in work.
Sure.
Or
I've got 2 or 3 of those at the moment. So
so I get so it really depends, doesn't it? Because we might have clients like that. So it's a different kind of, standard that we're looking, or they're looking at, achieving. And then we've got other clients, some ADHDs that are very, very high performing. Maybe they've moved from, kind of working in a firm to starting up their own business, and they're doing well, but, they're holding back because they're not feeling safe. And this is interesting, Richard, I was going to ask you about this part. There's safety, and yes, ADHDers need to feel safe. But one problem with that, particularly if they are an entrepreneur and they kind of need to make their presence felt, that doesn't feel safe to put yourself out there as an ADHDer. It's I'd love to get your take on that. Where do you switch? Is there a way of going into your discomfort zone in a safe way?
I think a lot of individuals with ADHD, this might sound a bit controversial, but actually put themselves into fight or flight in order to do things, get stuff done. And then that almost becomes a bit of a pattern. And I think that also contributes to what Alex says about energy, is the fact that, we're using, in the absence of medication and understanding your ADHD, it is difficult. And perhaps doing things around exercise and nutrition and sleeping well and all that sort of other stuff. You have to kind of put yourself into those fight or flight situations to get work done, particularly if it's mundane. So I think quite a lot of that kind of, the nervous system dysregulation is from that. So it's managing that as well. So I don't know if that quite answers your question.
Yeah, I'd endorse that 100%. One of the things that I used to do, and I still use quite a lot in coaching, and I used to be an insights practitioner. And insights is personality profiling thing. It's based on the kind of work of Carl Jung. It's similar to Myers-Briggs. And what a classic ADHD profile in insights is a yellow, which is the extrovert feeler. And I was a high priest of yellow, and I kind of did my own insights profiles. I think about 96% yellow. And one of the things it says is exactly what Richard said, is that, what yellows need, and what, it can be a positive and a negative, is they need to create false fires. They basically, I think a lot of people with ADHD, it's some of the things that make them, a lot of people are conscious of overwhelm. A lot of things with people don't make people with ADHD stressed. I think a lot of people with ADHD can work quite well in managed bursts of intensity if they've got outlets for destimulation. They do need the right level of unambiguity of focus, the right level of interest, and the right level of urgency to get things done. And I think it's a fight. It's another Goldilocks thing. I mean, I think, like Richard says, safety. I always use the kind of Goldilocks analogy. I think you have to be careful about flying too close to the sun and melting your wings with ADHD. But I think working with intensity, using that stress and that urgency to get things done, is a valuable tool as well.
And I want to add here as well, completely agree. I think, to clarify, I think what we're all saying as well is that isn't the only way. And we're not saying that we're going to inflict that as coaches, that, we need strong accountability and that sort of thing. And I like to say to prospective clients as well that coaching is not a bigger, better, harder stick to really hit yourself over the head with, to really get things done this time. Because you've tried that. They all laugh when I say that as well, because they've tried it. They know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all tried it. Like, it's a very sort of traditional way of trying to get stuff done. But of course, we do it because it sort of works. We've got evidence that it works, right? So it's kind of finding that balance. And I think if you're using it as a conscious tool in places, that can work. But when you're using it in a kind of boom and bust, and you don't really know what you're doing, but you know you've got this cycle and it just burns you out, that's different. And I think that's a big part of what we probably all do in sessions with our clients. And you know, that's why we call ourselves strengths-based coaches as well, because I'd say that's the kind of opposite of the big stick, as it were.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because ADHDers tend to kind of be more motivated to run away from the pain. You know, that's what's usually going to get them to kind of do those things. As opposed to the carrot, particularly if the carrot's too far away or not in sight, you know, they tend to activate more if it's like urgent. You know, they're going to get in trouble if they don't get that deadline, you know, as opposed to, oh, if I do this thing really well, I'll be able to get this thing, you know, or this is, you know, it's more, I don't want to get into trouble. I don't want people to reject me. So yeah, it's a very powerful tool, that kind of stick. But like you said, we've got to be careful how often it's wielded, how it's, you know, as you said, I think if it's an intentional thing and it's a safe way of doing it, but yeah, we got to be careful with reinforcing that negative narrative and reinforcing this kind of guilt, shame. I'd love to hear from other coaches, in terms of the carrot and the stick approaches, like, well, what do you use, or what do you see kind of clients using, and what's helpful, what's healthy?
I think from my experience, a lot of clients don't recognize that they have such strengths that they, in fact, hadn't considered embracing. So we talk about maybe what they do or what they've studied or jobs that they've liked, but sort of allowing them to look a bit more deeply, or kind of ask them to explain around what it is that appeals to them, can identify a career or a job or something that they maybe hadn't considered before. So I think the space for them to do that is something that coaching often provides, and then allowing them to sort of lean into that and own that and give them permission to think of themselves in a way maybe they hadn't, is also something that I've seen in coaching.
Anyone else want to add to that, or to talk about the motivations for ADHDers that we coach?
I would say that generally speaking, sustainably, I think reward-based strategies work better than stick-based strategies with ADHD. I mean, I think you can shore up things in the short term with stick-based strategies, but you know, it's not a rational thing, ADHD. It's very much driven by intuition, it's driven by emotion. And I think the other thing that I add to that is that I think one of the things that a lot of people that do with ADHD is they wait to feel ready. If you said to someone with ADHD, you know, book a driving test or book an exam when you're ready, they would never ever book a driving test. And I think that's one of the greatest tragedies of ADHD. I think basically one of the things that I've learned with my own ADHD is that over preparing is often problematic. I think my skills sharp when I need them and never beforehand. And it's quite a difficult thing to convince someone over a week or 2 weeks, but definitely when you work with someone for a while, you know, you can test that hypothesis. I think sometimes, you know, it's basically the way you progress with ADHD is you do have to be a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and you connect the dots in doing so. You know, you need to do that rather than waiting to feel ready. If you wait to feel ready, you'll never do anything with ADHD.
Yeah, like what David was saying in his opening speech, ADHD being a challenge of momentum, you know, and I guess that's one of the key things we do as ADHD coaches. We're able to help ADHDers get out of their own way. We're able to help ADHDers throw their backpack over the wall. I love doing that. But in a safe way, though. You know, and this is the thing about, I think, helping ADHDers into the discomfort zone, particularly maybe the entrepreneurs that are trying to grow their business, grow their presence, because it's not going to feel comfortable. But then, you know, everything they kind of want lies on that other side of fear, that kind of discomfort zone. And so we kind of, you know, we help build them up, build up the evidence of their success, build up, you know, the evidence that things that they've done maybe before are going to work again for them, and, you know, help them get perspective, identify what's at stake, because of their RSD and their catastrophization, they're going to build it up into the world is going to end if I post this thing on social media. So as coaches, we're able to help them, you know, get a clearer picture and help them feel more prepared to go into that discomfort zone. And, you know, once they have thrown that backpack, we remove their choice. But again, all, you know, this is something that they want to do, and it's all measured. And yeah, so they're not doing it alone. And I think that's key, isn't it? Would you say, coaches, that this body double strategy that works so well for ADHD is coaching is, you know, one of the most effective body double strategies for ADHD is. Anyone want to say anything about that?
I think I use it a lot for myself as well in my work. I think it is a genius strategy. And also another one, I think, as Alex said earlier, you don't necessarily need to say, oh, I have ADHD if you're employed in a big environment, therefore, you know, I need body doubling. You can kind of just ask if you've got colleagues and teams that, oh, should we do that together? Or should we just do it sitting next to each other? We're kind of assuming everybody knows what body doubling is as well now, but yeah, just working alongside and creating that real accountability, right? Because kidding ourselves and sort of creating sort of goals in our minds have very little effect. We're much smarter than that.
So body doubling.
That's why body doubling works well.
Sorry, just to into body doubling, the foundation of safety is connection and co-regulation. So that's being with others. and when we have that, that's why it works so well. It's really effective.
And I think a lot of people with ADHD are conceptual learners. I mean, one of the things I say to a lot of people is, where are your collaborative foils? You know, you have to have the right collaborative foils. I think if you know, and I think a coach could be a very good collaborative foil. You know, sometimes just talking something through with someone who understands. You know, one of the things that they used to say in my business coaching is that a good coach holds a client's vision for them, and that sounds quite pretentious, but what it actually means is you're helping, particularly with ADHD, you're helping people to remember what they know. Well, you told me, you know, when this was going well 3 weeks ago, you had this, and you'd spent this, you did this exercise, you were sleeping like this, you were working with X, you had a handover point here, and it's a lot of it is that. It's just reminding, you know, I think a lot of people, if you work in a vacuum with ADHD, bad things tend to happen quite quickly. Things like dissertations are brutal because there's no feedback, there's no energy around what you're doing. So you have to create that energy, and you have to create those feedback loops.
Yeah, such great points. And yeah, Eleni and I working with the university students and high school students, yeah, very much I get that. And we talked about that yesterday, actually. But yeah, there's huge value. So hopefully participants, now that you've heard from us ADHD coaches, and thank you guys for sharing all your experiences and strategies. So hopefully everyone's got a much better idea of what we ADHD coaches do for ADHDers. So I'm going to now say thanks to the coaches, and we're going to move to our psychiatrists.